Once a promising contender for creating a rival to Germany's many distinct automakers, the Borgward Group rose to prominence during the late 1940s and early 1950s as a creator of incredibly stylish and innovative cars that were spread across various different market segments. Unfortunately, just as the company was starting to make its mark following the notable success of its 1954-built Isabella, the firm rapidly collapsed in a controversial bankruptcy that sent shockwaves through the German auto industry. Although despite the demise of a name now seldom recognized in the modern automotive scene, the title of Borgward would re-emerge half a century after its demise from a very unlikely origin. Like many car companies, Borgward was the brainchild of just one man, the eponymous Carl Friedrich Wilhelm or F.W. Borgward of Altona, Germany. Borgward, born in November 1890, being one of 13 children of coal retailer Wilhelm Borgward, and showed a keen interest in engineering early in life, when he left school at the age of 16 to become an apprentice for a local locksmith, before undertaking mechanical engineering studies and finally achieving a degree in engineering from the Hanover Technical University in 1913. His civilian aspirations were cut short, though, when he was enlisted into the German army and saw action in World War I, during which he was wounded and returned home for recuperation, Borgward taking this opportunity to join the Bremer Kuhlerfabrik Company, which was a local producer of tires, but by 1919, Borgward's expertise in his craft meant he was able to redirect the small company to instead make radiators and body panels under contract for Hansa Lloyd, a Bremen-based car manufacturer founded in 1905. By 1921, Borgward had been repeatedly promoted until he eventually took over as owner of the business and renamed it to Bremer Kuhlerfabrik Borgward & Company, his long-term goal being to develop his own bespoke car models, but had not the capital to support his original proposal for a two-cylinder sports car project, instead investing his efforts into a three-wheeled 120cc delivery cart with a single front wheel that was employed by the German Postal Service in 1924 and was affectionately dubbed the Blitzkarren or Lightning Cart. Borgward's dream was partially realized in 1926 when he released Goliath, a single rear-wheel motor trike with a two-stroke 200 to 250cc engine, Goliath being followed by the derivative Goliath Rapid and similar 350cc Goliath Standard, before finally seeing the first four-wheeled models emerge in 1929 and 1930 in the form of the Express with a two-cylinder 2-stroke 600cc engine and the Superior, a 4-stroke 2,350cc 4-cylinder 1.5-ton lorry. The Superior proved to be such a commercial success that the Goliath Werke was, by 1931, able to garner enough funds to buy out the Hansa Lloyd firm outright, the takeover of Hansa Lloyd allowing Borgward to create his first dedicated car model as a 200cc three-wheeler with a single front wheel, a rear-mounted dicky seat, and a top speed of 35 miles an hour, followed by his first four-wheeled car in the form of the 1933 Hansa 400 and later Hansa 500. Borgward's focus on creating design elegance coming to fruition in 1934 as the beautiful four-stroke Hansa 1100 and Hansa 1700 models. This, together with the fast and elegant Hansa twin-carburetted 1700 Sports Cabriolet, meant enlargements in the range from 1938 would lead to the Hansa product lineup comprising the Hansa 2000 and Hansa 3500, although in 1939 the Hansa title was dropped in favor of Borgward's own moniker, thus resulting in the Borgward 2000 and Borgward 2300 as the first cars to be released under his name, the design and styling prowess of the Bremen-based Carmaker giving serious competition to contemporary rivals such as Opel, Ford, Adler, Hanomag and Wanderer. World War II, however, had a devastating effect on Borgward's car-building aspiration, as in order to support the Nazi war effort, his factory in Bremen was repurposed for the construction of military vehicles and armaments, including the Borgward Staff Car, which provided 11 seats and integrated a complex transmission that allowed for 2-, 4-, and 6-wheel drive, and the Borgward B3000 military lorry that saw action on all of the German front lines during the conflict. Thus, the Borgward production facilities in Bremen became an ideal target for air raids, and in 1944 the entire factory was razed to the ground by sustained aerial attacks that rendered an end to all vehicular assembly, and following the war's conclusion in 1945, Borgward himself was arrested by the victorious Allies for being one of the biggest suppliers of military equipment to the Nazi regime, and was subsequently sentenced to 3 years in prison. The car builder, upon his release in 1948, being faced with the daunting task of having to rebuild his company from scratch in a nation devastated both physically and economically by their defeat. However, through a sleight of hand, So as to circumvent limited ration supplies of raw materials, he opted to create a conglomerate of 3 shadow firms under the umbrella Borgward Group that would allow him to receive raw material supplies for the individual businesses, but cumulatively see his newly established Borgward Group be provided material supplies that far exceeded the rations he would normally receive as an individual company. These shadow firms being Goliath, which specialized in luxury models, Lloyd for low-end family cars, and Borgward Hansa for mid-range and entry-level luxury models. In practice, however, the operation of 3 separate companies with independent engineering, styling, and sales departments was a costly venture, and often led to these departments either working against one another or developing identical technology concurrently without being aware that another of their fellow firms in the Borgward Group was doing the same, with one example being when Lloyd created a new 900cc flat-4 water-cooled engine, even though Goliath had already developed one themselves. Interestingly, though, the Lloyd power unit was eventually employed by Japanese carmaker Subaru as a prototype for their boxer engines that would ultimately find work inside the strangely styled Subaru 360 city car, while Borgward released his first post-war model in 1949 as the Borgward Hansa 1500, a low, smooth design that allowed for a highly flexible platform onto which all manner of bodies could be placed, the 1500 being made available as a 2- and 4-door saloon, a 2-door cabriolet, a 2-door station wagon, a 2-door panel van, and a 2-door pickup truck, while from 1952, Borgward entered the realm of luxury motoring so as to combat Mercedes-Benz with the Borgward Hansa 2400 Fastback, a car that integrated into its design many styling cues from contemporary American models such as the Hudson Super Wasp. Alongside car production, the combined Borgward, Hansa, Goliath and Lloyd firms also provided mass assembly for diesel and petrol lorries that were employed in all manner of applications across Western Europe, their remit also including commercial vehicles, vans, buses, army vehicles, fire engines, stationary engines, tanks, boats, electric vehicles, and even a helicopter in the form of the Borgward Colibri of 1958. This would come in the form of a 3-seat utility helicopter that had been designed by Heinrich Fokker, but was built by Borgward at his factory in Bremen, this helicopter being the first German helicopter to be built after World War II, and the nation's first helicopter model since the Fokker Agilis FA-223 Drache transport helicopter of 1940, and was created as a response to the lifting of aircraft development restrictions in 1955 as implemented by the Allies. Borgward also extended its expertise into the realm of race cars during 1950 with the Borgward Hansa 1500 Type Inca, which broke the 1,000-mile record at the Autodrome de Monterey circuit near Paris with an average speed of 107.5 miles an hour, while his other racing successes included entries into Formula 2 racing, where he partnered with British racing legend John Cooper, and Carrera stock car racing events such as the Carrera Panamericana. The crowning achievement of the Borgward Company, however, would emerge in 1954 with the launch of the Isabella, a car that had originally gone under the development name of the Borgward Hansa 1500 as a replacement for the original 1500 of 1949, but was renamed to the Isabella following an off-the-cuff remark by Carl Borgward himself regarding the possible change in name for the upcoming model. The Borgward Hansa name was subsequently superseded on future models by just the Borgward title, although the Hansa mark continued to exist on the 2400 Fastback until 1955 and the luxury Pullman limousine until 1958. The Isabella incorporated a 1,493cc inline 4-cylinder overhead valve engine with a single downdraft carburetor, which, in combination with an extremely short intake manifold inside the rocker box, gave the appearance of an overhead cam engine as opposed to it being an extremely efficient pushrod power plant of 60 horsepower. Meanwhile, the exquisitely styled body provided a mixture of both aesthetics and practicality through its spacious, well-made interior, all of which was packaged in a comparatively light body shell weighing a mere 1,000 kilograms, much of its lightness being owed to the use of aluminium alloys for the gearbox, cylinder heads, and on many of the engine parts and covers, a more expensive but less noisy alternative to the more conventional pressed steel. The stylish body not only looking futuristic for 1954, but comprised a unibody construction with separate front and rear subframe. The front subframe was rubber-mounted, while the front suspension featured unequal wishbones, coil springs, and telescopic shock absorbers that were checked by an anti-roll bar, the rear being fitted with a fully independent swing axle, again featuring coil springs and telescopic shock absorbers, the car also including radius arms and pivoting rubber bearings on the front axle, a differential mounted to the rear subframe in large rubber bushes, and very large hydraulic drum brakes used in combination with twin leading shoes at the front, complete with wide aluminium alloy shoes. For the gearbox, this had 4 all-synchronmeshed forward speeds and 1 reversed, and was actuated by an extremely efficient and precise column gear change, marred only by its rather long throws, while the handbrake was mounted under the dashboard and was of an umbrella configuration that, with a bench seat, allowed for 3 abreast seating both front and rear, thus giving the car a comfortable 5-person capacity with a 6-person maximum. Inside, there was a polished Baker-like dashboard containing a clock, a temperature gauge, a petrol gauge, and a speedometer, with the wider cabin providing a cigarette lighter with a plug-in map reading light, 3 ashtrays, 1 under the dashboard and 2 in the rear side panels, and ample storage space comprising 2 door pockets and a glove box, which was later supplemented by 2 retractable cord-strung tabular-framed map holders mounted on the side of each footwell. Unusually, the doors had separate wind-down quarter lights providing draft-free ventilation, with separate heaters for the driver and passengers being provided alongside separate controls, and the large white steering wheel actuating a lightly weighted and rubber-coupled Worman peg or Worman roller steering box with 3 turns from lock to lock, allowing for incredibly precise steering at a tight turning circle of around 32 feet. The result was an incredibly well-balanced car with an even weight distribution and low center of gravity, presenting a machine with incredibly sure-footed handling at a comparatively economic fuel consumption of just 34 miles per gallon, the top speed for the Isabella being 87 miles an hour and the 0 to 60 time being 16 seconds, which, for saloon cars of the time, was generally equivalent to rival models such as the Mercedes-Benz 220 Saloon and the BMW 501, with Carl Borgward keeping the price of the Isabella low through a mixed price calculation with his other products, so as to remain competitive with his much larger Teutonic opponents. The only real drawbacks of the otherwise superb Isabella was the vertical fixing of the front bulkhead to the floor, which made for an awkward resting position for the driver's feet at a comparatively low driving position that was often difficult to climb into or out of for taller users. Though regardless of these minor niggles, the Borgward Isabella was perhaps the pinnacle of West Germany's automotive design prowess in the field of regular saloon cars, combining eye-catching American-style external appearances with a practical, comfortable and efficient design. A year after the launch of the Isabella in 1954, the Isabella Combi arrived as an estate version of the car, followed shortly thereafter by a bespoke convertible as produced by the renowned West German coach builder Karl Deutsch of Cologne, the convertible being launched as the Isabella Cabriolet, while the equivalent fixed-head coupe was marketed as the Deutsch Coupe, the Isabella Cabriolet being an outstandingly attractive car, and one whose aesthetics easily matched the classic lines of the legendary Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing in terms of beauty. The Deutsch Coupe would go on to be an incredibly rare variation of the model, with only 23 units produced at Carl Deutsch's own factory, while the regular Isabella Saloon and Coupe, as built by the Bremen Works, remained popular sellers, with 26,378 units sold during 1955, and thus making the Borgward firm the second largest in West Germany behind Volkswagen in terms of overall commercial performance. This was reflected in that, by 1959, the Borgward Group had successfully penetrated the highly insular and extremely demanding US market with over 500 individual dealers across the United States, their rise to prominence even catching the attention of the Detroit Giants, with Chrysler making an offer of 200 million Deutschmarks or $50 million to purchase a 51% share of the Borgward company, though Carl Borgward ultimately turned down this offer. In September 1955, the Isabella TS was added to the lineup and made its debut at that year's Frankfurt Motor Show. This car incorporating various engine improvements, including an altered compression ratio that was increased from 7:1 to 8:1, enlarged exhaust and inlet valves, strengthened pistons and bearings, and the original carburetor being replaced by a large twin-choke downdraft Solex, engine output for the TS being up to 75 horsepower, and thus allowed for a top speed of 98 miles an hour and a 0 to 60 time of 15.8 seconds, putting it easily on par with the 2.4-litre Jaguar Mark II. Cosmetic changes to the TS included individual reclining front seats to replace the bench, and additional chrome applied to the rear lights, parking lights, indicators, side strips, and around the window framework. The various mechanical modifications to the TS, in contrast to most high-performance versions of regular family saloons, being an increase in fuel efficiency of 38 miles per gallon, as opposed to the regular Isabella's 34. Unfortunately, despite the Isabella's huge initial success, overall sales dropped to 20,993 for the 1956 fiscal year, due to losses on the export market and the release of several new models by BMW, Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen, so as to match the barnstorming innovation of the Borgward Group, Borgward responding by replacing the Deutsch Coupe with an in-house equivalent of the Isabella two-seater coupe during 1957. Subsequent modifications to the design by Borgward himself created perhaps the most beautiful version of this model range ever released, presenting a car with its own style, but maintaining certain traits that ensured it remained distinctly an Isabella, incorporating a new dashboard largely carried over from the Borgward Hansa 1500, which was fitted with push-button controls, a cream finish with white instruments, and a soft-padded top, while the slightly plump yet flat shape of the original Isabella was replaced by a Coke bottle style. Electric windscreen washers were fitted as standard, while the rear wings sported totally new boomerang-shaped rear lights as a subtle homage to the American trend for space-age-style fins, the replacement of the Deutsch Coupe being compensated for by way of allowing Carl Deutsch to release his own higher-specification Coupe Cabriolet version that cost 10,000 Deutschmarks more than the basic Isabella Coupe, and was handcrafted at his Cologne workshop. Conscious of the large price gap between the Isabella Coupe and the next highest version of the model, the TS Saloon, Borgward introduced a higher specification version of the TS dubbed the TS Deluxe during the same year, so as to bridge the void, the Deluxe including two-tone paintwork and extra chrome, while the rest of the Isabella range was modified to integrate minor improvements, such as a new 10.5-gallon petrol tank, longer gear lever, improved suspension, new recessed steering wheel, new upholstery, and a new instrument cluster. Meanwhile, at the 1958 Frankfurt Motor Show, Borgward celebrated his 500,000th car built and sold since the formation of his revived company 10 years prior, this coinciding with the Saloon, TS, Deluxe, and Combi getting an enlarged boot, rear lights from the coupe, and smaller diamond-shaped emblems on the front grille. 1959 proving to be the highest output year for the Isabella range, with 38,000 units delivered, while exports, beyond those shipped to the United States, included units sold in Australia, New Zealand, and Malaya. 1959, however, would prove to be the point where Borgward stumbled fatally, as while the year started off nicely with the launch of the P100 Big 6 four-door saloon, a 100-mile-an-hour six-cylinder machine built to do battle with the Mercedes-Benz 220, the car's lengthy development cost the overall group a veritable fortune. This was poorly timed with the impact of the Eisenhower recession of the previous year, which had seen car sales across the Western world collapse to their lowest level since the end of the war, this being most prominent in the United States, where due to there being such an exceptionally low demand for new models by the buying public, unsold Borgwards, together with other European models such as Renaults and Volkswagens, were piling up in such vast numbers that new units being transported to the United States had to be turned away when their ships arrived at American harbors. Meanwhile, at the bottom end of the Borgward Group's corporate hierarchy, the Lloyd brand released for 1959 the Arabella, an incredibly stylish small family car, reminiscent of contemporary Chryslers that was, for all intents and purposes, an excellent machine from a technical and design standpoint, featuring the very latest in crash safety, a spacious cabin with good storage space and all-around visibility, and a smooth four-cylinder engine that was a major step up from the preceding Lloyd Alexander. Unfortunately, in order to beat their rivals at Volkswagen, which was continuing to eat away large portions of the economy car market with their 1930s-era Beetle, the Lloyd Arabella had been developed in a staggeringly short 23 months, as opposed to the usual convention of 3 to 5 years, normally required to bring a comprehensive new model from conception to sales entry, while a rushed assembly meant the first 1,000 cars delivered to customers left the factory with a plethora of quality faults that included a leaky passenger cabin and problems with the gearbox. This initial slew of issues required Borgward to undertake an expensive recall of this initial batch of cars, as well as undertaking rectification on undelivered units still coming down the production line, leading to a lengthy waiting period, which, due to delivery times for new cars on the West German market having dropped to its lowest figure since the end of the war, meant prospective buyers grew rapidly impatient with Lloyd, and opted instead to take on the comparative Beetle, which had little to no waiting time. Unsold Lloyd Arabellas would pile up in large numbers on vacant land behind the Bremen factory, while despite Borgward cars being known for their often unreliable nature due to Carl Borgward's insistence on applying innovative but not thoroughly tested facets to the design, the abysmal quality of the Arabellas in the eyes of the buying public was considered unforgivable. Having made a substantial loss on the incredibly expensive Arabella, in combination with the development costs for P100 and the sudden collapse in demand for foreign cars on the American market, the Borgward management attempted to recoup its outgoings by way of fluctuating the price of the Arabella, raising the price of the car from its launch figure of 5,250 Deutschmarks to 5,490 in June 1960, while also offering a stripped-down base model that entered sales at 4,985 Deutschmarks. However, by this point, the ground had been well and truly lost to Volkswagen and its Beetle for the small family car market, as well as foreign interlopers that began to appear in the form of the Austin Mini of Britain, both of which were sold at prices far below those being offered at Borgward, while Carl Borgward, in his attempt to find investment in order to shore up his firm, approached the Bremen Senate in December 1960 so as to lend him 10 million Deutschmarks of state funding that would be supported by loans from several German banks, by which time the Borgward company has slipped to 5th place in terms of sales output from Germany's automakers. His methods as to coercing the Bremen Senate, however, faced severe scrutiny in the eyes of the West German media, as if his demands for state funding were not met. He held his own workforce to ransom by threatening to fire large portions of the company's staff, a move that would paint the Bremen Senate in a dim light among the local population for allowing so many workers to be made redundant through not supporting one of the region's major employers. However, this was a bluff that Borgward could not follow through, as, at the time, a recent boom in shipbuilding at the nearby shipyard meant those employees he proposed to sack would easily find similar work that demanded additional labor, leaving no political ramifications for the Bremen Senate. And although they initially agreed to provide the necessary state funding, Borgward's threats of mass unemployment led to a hostile reception by the newspapers, with one particularly scathing and sensational article published on January 31, 1961, leading to the supplier's credit lines being cut off and the Bremen Senate stopping all cash flow. With the company now only days away from bankruptcy, and the Senate placed in the position of advantage over an increasingly desperate Borgward, their offer instead was to provide state funding on the condition that Borgward pledge his company to the Bremen government, and following a tense 13-hour meeting, the company founder ultimately agreed to the Senate's terms on February 4th, averting the group's impending financial collapse. With the Senate now dictating the management decisions at Borgward, they appointed Johannes Semmler as chairman of the company's supervisory board, Semmler having made a name for himself a year prior when he helped to restructure the finances at BMW following the disastrous introduction of the BMW 507 sports car, and on July 28, 1961, he proposed establishing Vergleichsverfahren, or settlement procedure, on the Borgward company, a court procedure in which, under the supervision of the court, a debtor is given the opportunity to avert bankruptcy through a settlement that includes all creditors and thus preserve his company. However, the length of time between Semmler's appointment as chairman of the supervisory board in February and the enacting of Vergleichsverfahren has often been rumored as a deliberate stall tactic as influenced by BMW chairman Herbert Quandt, who did whatever he could to ensure that rescue for the Borgward company came too late, while at the same time several firms from across Europe placed expressions of interest in purchasing the Borgward Group outright, including the British Motor Corporation or BMC, who, in a manner similar to Innocenti of Italy, proposed using the Borgward mark as a means of selling regular BMC cars such as the Mini and the Austin A40 Purina across northern and western Europe, but they ultimately hesitated in getting the best deal available. Inevitably, the Borgward Group was damaged beyond repair, and following the failure of a cooperative deal set up by the Borgward dealerships, suppliers and customers, the firm was declared insolvent in September 1961, just as work on developing a replacement Isabella with a new 1600cc engine and body styling by the Italian Carrozzeria Frua was coming to the production stage, with the Bremen works being sold at bankruptcy auction to the van maker Henschel. Henschel operated the plant until their takeover by Daimler-Benz in 1971, who began utilizing the former Borgward facility for the assembly of Mercedes T1 transporter vans, and later estate versions of the W123 E-Class passenger car from 1977, the factory having since been the production works for the Mercedes SL, the SLK, the C-Class GLK, and the E-Class Coupe and Convertible. Meanwhile, the rights to the upcoming new version of the Isabella were bought by German car builder Hans Glass, and ultimately came to fruition as the Glass 1700, the small company eventually being acquired by BMW in 1966, with the Glass 1700 discontinued a year later to avoid internal competition with BMW's own 1800, while all pressings and equipment for the assembly of the P100 were bought by Impulsora Mexicana Automotriz. This company continued production of the Borgward P100 from March 1963 at their Monterrey plant in the state of Nuevo León until 1970, with key personnel from the collapsed Borgward company largely migrating over to BMW, while Carl Borgward himself died a broken man on July 28, 1963, at the age of 73, with later calculations conducted following the collapse of the Carmaker, determining that the figure of 10 million Deutschmarks was far more than what was necessary to rescue the firm from bankruptcy, and that a much smaller sum as provided by local banks and the Bremen Senate could have easily settled Borgward's debts. This, however, was not the end of the Borgward name, as 50 years after the car builder wrapped up in 1961, the rights to the mark were acquired in 2011 by Foton, the commercial vehicle subsidiary of the Chinese state-owned Beijing Automotive Group or BAIC, the purchase of the Borgward moniker by Photon being so as to allow the group to expand from its already highly successful commercial vehicles business into passenger car development, while at the same time adopting the name of a German car company, which, for the Chinese market, is perceived with the highest value. The newly revived Borgward was based at a renovated factory in suburban Beijing during 2015, with a forecast sales output of 80,000 units by 2020. The launch models for the new company being the BX7 of 2016, a compact luxury SUV based on the regular Senova X65 crossover SUV, and was of an equivalent size to the Audi Q5, the BX5, a smaller subcompact version of the BX7 which was complemented by the sporty fastback BX6, and the smallest member of the range, the BX3, which was about the size of an MG ZS. Build-out for the Borgward Group was set at 10,000 new cars per annum, with proposals also including the development of a concept car dubbed the Isabella, which was presented at the 2017 International Motor Show in Germany, and for sales on the European market to commence from 2018, which would include the opening of a new corporate headquarters and sales center in Stuttgart, alongside proposals for a further 30 sales centers across Europe, together with a new production facility in the company's spiritual home of Bremen. Unfortunately, though, the Borgward revival was not the commercial success hoped for by its developers, as amid a slew of startup companies on the Chinese market, nearly all of whom offered crossover SUVs of similar size and trim specifications as the BX3, 5, 6, and 7, the Borgward range was put at an immediate disadvantage due to the prestige of the name pushing up the asking price, thus making it comparatively expensive next to both Chinese rivals such as MG, but also European builders like Audi, Volkswagen, and BMW. The BX7 for the 2017 fiscal year sold approximately 30,000 units, before seeing a steep drop-off in sales for 2018, with commercial performance for the company being so poor that in 2019 Photon sold two-thirds of its shares in the Borgward firm to the Chinese ride-hailing and short-term rental provider UCar, who employed BX3s, 5s, and 7s as part of their rental fleet, so as to drum up necessary revenue, UCar initially keeping sales figures stabilized, but with considerable doubt looming as to the potential for their new business model. In the end, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic during early 2020, which caused a catastrophic downturn in new car sales, meant for the first quarter of the year, Borgward reported only 5,000 new cars sold globally, sales for the Borgward in Europe being particularly dismal, as since the company was launched on the European market during the summer of 2018, only 100 examples of the BX5 and 7 had been delivered to customers, with the former costing €36,200 and the latter costing €44,200 with a 4-year warranty and service, making them more expensive than the rival MG GS and ZS. Meanwhile, the European headquarters in Stuttgart were reportedly long abandoned by mid-2020, and sales centers in Europe comprised only a peppering of sites across Germany, Luxembourg, and Belgium, with costs continuing to spiral for the ailing firm until it eventually entered administration in July 2021, followed in December of the same year by a Beijing court injunction seizing assets related to the Borgward venture due to non-payment of debts. The Photon Motor Company, due both to the downturn in new car sales and the money lost on the Borgward venture, ultimately collapsing into bankruptcy on April 8, 2022, and the Borgward brand once again disappeared into history. Today, the Borgward name, despite once holding the position of Germany's second best-selling car brand, has long faded into obscurity, although for those who are aware of this marque's existence, there is a dedicated following for a company that once provided an absolutely perfect mixture of style and innovation that, while not always presenting the best reliability, helped to shape the future of Germany's car industry by demanding a great degree of technical, mechanical, and styling standards from its rivals, thereby turning what was the tattered remains of a broken nation at the end of World War II into the powerhouse of Europe's automotive scene by the dawn of the 1960s.